going to go ahead and get started. There may be some folks that straggle in, but appreciate folks that are here. I'm excited to dive in. My name is Brad Chase. I work at Ripple, which is a company that kind of brings kind of compliant, secure, simple digital asset infrastructure to financial institutions and enterprises. At Ripple, I work within a team we call RippleX, which is where we actually make contributions to open source blockchain protocols, and then the rest of Ripple takes and builds on top of that to offer enterprise financial services. And kind of my experience kind of being in both of those worlds, so you have this notion of DeFi, blockchain on the one hand with traditional financial systems on the other. How do you actually bridge that gap and bring solutions? So it's kind of a survey of what's happening in the field. But kind of as an opener, kind of show of hands, who here interacts with the financial system every day, be it sending a payment, using a credit card, paying for a loan, pretty much everybody, right? And just keep in mind maybe one of those activities that you did in the last 24 hours. Who, raise a hand, has used either crypto or a DeFi system? Who has dabbled and touched crypto in their life? Okay, so actually also pretty good hand raise. Who of you has used crypto for that financial application that you were thinking about during my first question? So no hands for the people on the video recording. And that's the divide that kind of we're talking about and thinking about at Ripple, where where are the opportunities, where are the ways in which kind of the excitement that you see in the digital asset space, DeFi space, can actually start to be part and parcel solving real problems for institutional finance, and then by extension, consumers that are interacting with it. And so what I'll try to do is motivate that a little bit more, like, why should you care? Why is that interesting? What are the challenges that we see and the opportunities that we have? What's the way in which, at least at Ripple, we've thought about kind of going about this, in particular, this XRP ledger, which is the blockchain that we contribute to and build a lot on top of. What are some of the capabilities that it has that let you start to do this, and a bit kind of toward the future of where that can take us. So to start, my first FinTech DevCon, this is an awesome conference. I'm learning a lot myself here, new to the FinTech space in many ways. But we believe, technology can actually be a great way to create a better financial system for real people, real businesses, and real assets. In the same way that technology has transformed the way you move and kind of interact with information, we think the same thing should happen to value, right? You send an email around the world and don't even think how long it's going to take and whether it's going to get there. You can't do that with money today, but you should. FinTech has certainly made a lot of progress there and continues to grow and a lot of promise. I think even in the keynote this morning, even with the macro economy up and down, there still are great opportunities and great value propositions that FinTech is solving for real customers, and studies showing that we continue to see a lot of growth. But what are some of those opportunities? I'm not going to talk about all of these, but where are those frictions still big? So one, at Ripple, on the enterprise side that we think a lot about is payments, specifically cross-border global payments. It's emerged that to facilitate global finance, but there's often many intermediaries that kind of are required to go between countries to facilitate whatever jurisdictional requirements exist, and the lack of a singular global payment rail. That counterparties, add multi-days to settlements. It's fragmented. You don't always know the status of a payment, and so that's just a really challenging customer experience. Like, technology should be able to help. Kind of further down the list, you think about credit, same type of thing. There's a long tail of smaller value or even medium value borrowers that you want to be able to service, or maybe there's even a broader pool of folks that are willing to provide capital to lend, but the act of servicing, understanding, assessing those risks, and managing those loans is onerous. Can technology also kind of increase access by making it easier to do these things? And kind of maybe this slide is actually one to keep in your head throughout the talk, but one way I think about it is that, there's been, a lot of progress kind of at the top of the stack where, you can buy and sell options on Robinhood on your phone that, a decade ago, like that's unheard of. You'd have to log into some banking system or call a broker or something. So there's been a lot of ways in which both for consumers and businesses, experiences have been improved dramatically. For those companies to do that well, there's another set of fintech companies that have built better APIs, abstraction layers that kind of let you build applications using modern technology strategies. But the further you go down the stack, kind of even to issuing banks that are kind of other payment processors or even lending companies or even exchanges, the further you go down the stack, the harder it is to innovate. I mean, that's where all the money is. That's kind of where the inertia of the global financial system has been. And so it just takes more work to improve those things. For good reason, right? There's regulation, there's security, there's, the whole world running on these systems. It's not a thing that you're going to switch out overnight. But to me, what's, at least my perspective is interesting is like, in many ways, the beginning of blockchain was actually thinking about replacing and modernizing this bottom rail. And I'll talk to you a little bit more about that. But where blockchain still has ways to go is to go up the stack and to really be integrated into these other systems, to have those user experiences and to be seamless. And so from the roadblock aspect of this talk, it's really about that divide where how and in which ways can blockchain and decentralized financial applications start to kind of walk up this chain and be kind of a seamless part of solving real-world financial use cases. So again, as a foundation, why is blockchain potentially a good place to start there? So really the original use cases, original blockchains kind of were almost payment networks, right? So they were a way to solve the double spend problem, to have accounts and payments and value and currencies that can be flowed between users. What's the distinguishing characteristic here is that these are decentralized, open networks with minimal intermediaries that are always on 24/7, and as a result, it's much easier to get access and to use these systems. It's kind of like this shared infrastructure you have as a payments network. Certainly there's different risks that are associated with using blockchain versus traditional financial payment networks or even exchanges for that matter. But it is like a new paradigm, a new kind of leapfrog of technology that can serve those functions at the foundational layer. Some examples of what that looks like. So you have Bitcoin, came out in 2008 and was really that decentralized currency, minimal programmability, so it was very good at kind of storing value and sending value. And it's certainly grown a lot since 2008 and still has a lot of traction in that regard. On the other end, you've got Ethereum, which is also well known, started in 2014, and that's taken the track of programmability. So it's thinking about really a kind of global compute platform where you can deploy smart contracts that run decentralized on this network. And so there's limitless applications that you can think about doing. Certainly many of those are related to finance and financial services. In the middle, what I know the most about, so hence I'll be referencing often, is the XRP ledger. This is another decentralized blockchain that was created back in 2012, really from folks that came out of the Bitcoin community thinking about, changes or differences in a consensus model that would allow for lower latency, lower cost payments in particular and value transfer, but increasingly other kind of fixed primitives, so not fully programmable, but composable primitives that go and let you solve financial cases. So Ripple that started with cross-border payments, and we'll be talking through about how we see that evolving to other financial use cases. So, how do we think about bridging this divide? How do we think about, making crypto not a parallel universe, but really part of the same universe that traditional finance plays in? So first of all, what is DeFi? Again, let's make sure that's clearly defined. So decentralized finance is really about what started as just kind of payment capabilities going up and adding more of the full suite of financial services. So these are things that maybe today brokerages, exchanges, or banks do, but kind of creating kind of instances of this on a distributed ledger, so that same properties of permissionless, distributed, immutable, trustless, 24/7, but beyond just payments. So that could be trading, that could be lending, and we'll kind of touch on a couple more as we go. This is not new. There's a lot of players in this space, and you've started to see solutions come that map quite well back to traditional financial infrastructure. So you've got wallets and asset management. These are things that you can store crypto assets with and custody them, much like there are ways that you custody traditional assets. There's marketplaces and liquidity that in a decentralized manner, so again, running without a singular entity that's managing it on these blockchains, ways to trade. Stable coins are ways to represent typically fiat value, so US dollar, euro value on a blockchain. Lending protocols that let you kind of really end-to-end underwrite, lend, and facilitate credit relationships on the blockchain. And so there's a lot of different names here. This is kind of across a variety of different underlying level 1 blockchains. But the takeaway I'd share for you is like DeFi is very much leveraging an understanding of how traditional financial services are built, and you're starting to see these components that have grown to facilitate specific parts of that infrastructure. What are some of the differences here as a result? So the benefits, again, is because of those properties that started from the decentralized blockchain networks, you get kind of this greater openness, so there's just kind of easier access, easier efficiency. Again, this kind of somewhat sense of a shared infrastructure that should lower barriers to entry. And then again, because it's new technology, you kind of get to leapfrog in a sense where you can have more modern messaging schemes or reliability schemes or even data models that are hard to shoehorn into traditional services. The flip side, of course, as any new technology, standardization is a challenge. You saw all those logos and names on the slide before. How do those things interoperate together? How do you actually kind of understand how they connect in a coherent manner to build and solve a specific business problem? It's something that's still emerging. As a new technology and in a regulated space, government regulations differ. And especially when you're thinking about blockchain solutions as being global by nature, by default, making sure that they work well in different jurisdictions is non-trivial. And not to mention the fact that regulators are learning the technology well and how to properly regulate it. Again, since it's open, how do you kind of ensure that financial data, which is often sensitive, is kind of those privacy needs are protected, but still you're able to get the benefit of having these protocols working with the financial data. And then certainly, even with standardization, there's still also a sense of interoperability where part of the great benefit of crypto, I'll touch on a little bit later too, is that it is open, that people are contributing in an open source manner and learning. And so you're going to have a lot of different systems that need to work together, the same way that the internet has evolved. How do things actually talk to each other? Where on the internet, you don't think about having a certain Wi-Fi router that you need to use to go access Facebook, but YouTube, you can use only a certain other type of connection to the internet. It kind of, once you're on, you have access to everything in a seamless way. That being said, I think really in the past, if you think of DeFi maybe kind of really coming around the last 3 to 4 years, I'd say the last year has really seen institutions leaning in a way that was not the case earlier. So just some figures to share here, $160 billion stablecoin market cap. All these institutional investors, I think even like BlackRock and others, are actually starting to issue things on blockchains. It's still in that early day phase where people are learning a lot, but it's happening, and a lot of institutions are seeing the opportunity here. If you kind of see this forecast of a view of more tokenization, so that is representation of real world value on blockchains. And so I think this is the schematic the conference organizers suggested for kind of really highlighting what the roadblock is here. What is the reason we're talking about this? It's really, solving actual real-world use cases. Cross-border payments, for example, requires DeFi and TradFi integrating well. And that's the big challenge. That's the challenge the industry faces. Now we're kind of out of that prototype phase, out of that proof of concept phase. It's like, how do we do the hard work of integration? And so how we thought about that at Ripple and the way we contribute and work with the XRP ledger. So again, XRP ledger, from day one back in 2012, which amazing for me to say out loud, over a decade ago. really purpose-built for payments and value transfer. Recognizing, I think, early on the power of Bitcoin, but seeing some of the challenges in cost and speed that make it not as useful for payments. Ripple, again, and in fact, anyone in the space can think about what role you play, right? So you can be a developer or a user of blockchains. You can integrate against the APIs, use the capabilities on the blockchain to power your business, which again, now for Ripple, that means we're building enterprise software like our cross-border payments product that uses the XRP ledger and XRP as a bridge asset to facilitate cross-border payments. But you can also be a contributor back into these open source ecosystems. You can write protocol features, you can propose changes, you can develop smart contracts on chains and whatnot. And I think that's, let's see what the audience says in Q&A. Like, it's a little bit different than TradFi. Like TradFi, it's not particularly common to be able to contribute back to this infrastructure that is then enabling your business. And that network effect is pretty powerful. And in fact, I'd say that's a lot of what's gotten the traction to date on blockchains and DeFi is there is this network effect where people can interact and play together and learn together and grow together in the ecosystem. But that's a foundation that can also apply as we're getting the kind of enterprise institutional adoption where institutions will benefit from participating as both of these type of actors in the space. But what are the ingredients to really kind of bridge this divide? Like, what do we think about taking DeFi and making it institutional grade? So it really comes down to kind of these four things. One, again, is thinking about what are those core financial primitives. So, the power of blockchain is that you can have the shared solutions that you can use, but it's important that these capabilities compose well. So you get the benefit when you're in an open ecosystem of adopting one and then having the benefit of the others automatically for you. You need to be thinking about building them for real world use cases from day one. It's not an afterthought. Likewise, compliance is not an afterthought. I think that's certainly what the industry is spending a lot of time on now, where you see a lot of, and I'm sure that's folks who have used this, it's not yet in your everyday life because the compliance aspects haven't been solved yet. But there's a lot of opportunity and progress to date that's happening here. And lastly, you need it to be easy to use for builders. It can't always be the people who are only experts in the deepest layer of the consensus protocols for a particular stack that can adopt it. It needs to be a thing that if you're actually trying to go, develop a lending program in Africa, like you want to be focused on your customers there. You don't want to be focused on learning the intricacies of the blockchain. So what's the first way that you start to do this? And this is really where the adoptions happen most to date, and it's kind of what's hot right now. And this is tokenization. So again, I mentioned stablecoins earlier. This is the idea that at the bottom layer of that financial stack, that's where all the value is today. That's, banks are where you have, you store your money, exchanges are where you trade your securities, but like all of these real world things, that represents the economic value in the world today. And you need a way to represent those on the chain as the first way to start this integration with traditional finance. From kind of a engineering perspective, what does that mean? You need a taxonomy and a set of capabilities to represent these things. So these are different types of tokens. So this is fungible tokens all the way to semi-fungible tokens. And those are primitives that a lot of different blockchains, including the XRP ledger, offer today. So you can represent an asset, you can define it. How many of those assets there are, can they be exchanged with each other? What's the number of decimal places they need to represent their quantities? But this is the entry point. This is the on-ramp into the ecosystem. And once you have value represented on-chain, there's a question of what can you do with it? And so these are different protocols that you can start to develop. One example of this, again, kind of how it works on the XRP ledger is trading and liquidity. So DEX is abbreviation. It's not really abbreviation. It's just what we call decentralized exchanges. And in the XRP ledger, there's kind of two varieties that operate this way. So there's traditional order books. So this is analogous to what you have at the New York Stock Exchange, where users submit orders to buy or sell an asset, and there's a matching engine that kind of makes those meet, makes an exchange happen. But in a decentralized exchange, this is running fully on a blockchain and then kind of continuous manner. There's no one that is running that engine. It's the blockchain itself that's doing it. And those type of systems are very valuable for kind of more frequently traded assets and pairs of assets. On the other hand, you have something called liquidity pools, which are kind of come from this algorithmic market making domain. So these are pools where users can deposit pairs of assets to be liquidity providers. People that are liquidity takers that want to exchange those assets can then trade against that pool, paying a fee back to the pool, but the users don't have to actively manage it. There's an algorithmic rule which governs how that trading happens. But the power here, and this is the kind of posability angle, is once you have these on the same blockchain where you have all of these different assets that have been tokenized, you kind of for free get the ability to route payments through these things. So maybe you need to deliver pesos to somebody, but you only have dollars. In an alternate world, you would need to go make relationships with entities that can do that FX for you. You'd have to maintain that FX yourself if you want. The power of this is all these different users in this ecosystem will let you flow through the liquidity that they've offered without you actually having to go do it. So there's a nice composability that you get for free on the blockchain here. Another use case you can think about doing is lending, of course. And I think the takeaway here would be is one way in which we can start to bridge this divide is between TradFi and DeFi is you don't have to go full stop suddenly where everything's happening on the blockchain. In this case, you can think about these different elements leveling up where you can have assets available to lend in a pool. You can have the blockchain enforce kind of interest rules about how that accrues back to the lenders from the borrowers. But you can have the off-chain underwriting and the risk assessment done off-chain. That can be done using traditional systems and services. And it's kind of really more about some of the operations and kind of back office capabilities that you can get the benefit of the blockchain. And so, I think the takeaway here would be it doesn't have to be the all or nothing thing. It could be an incremental adoption where it matters for you. And that's just a flavor of two different financial applications and these primitives, again, a lending primitive and trading primitives that come together. And how do you think about layering on compliance on top of this, right? It can't be an afterthought, but it needs to be done in a composable way where you don't have to solve compliance in a bespoke manner for the different financial use cases you're considering. The way in which XRP Ledger thinks about this is a couple different ways. One is around trust lines. So this is, again, you have these assets that are issued on chain. So you issue a stable coin that's representing some currency. As an issuer of that asset, you can actually configure who else you're allowed to send that asset to. Users can configure which assets they're willing to hold. You can freeze these issued assets as needed or claw them back. You can also kind of restrict which accounts are allowed to send you different currencies. So it kind of gives you that suite of things where, again, as an incremental adoption, off-chain you can do KYC, KYB, AML, but then there's features within the blockchain that let you enforce your obligations to do those things. I think I even saw yesterday there was another company giving a talk on decentralized identity and verifiable credentials, where that's like the next layer up, where you can represent on the blockchain in a cryptographic manner your credentials that you have been KYC'd by some entity, and that entity can attest through cryptographic signatures that you are who you say you are, and that yes, they have attested that they've gone through your KYC program, and then that becomes basically its own token in a way on the chain, where you can then say, okay, you can only trade in a certain way if the other users you're trading against have this token. And so you, again, kind of can layer in more and more complexity, but in this composable way to meet your compliance obligations. And even if you solve all of those things kind of in terms of getting value on chain with tokenization, things you can do with different financial primitives, the compliance layer, you still need to make sure that your infrastructure lets you support interacting with data information off-chain or between chains. That data information off-chain is the idea of oracles. So this is a way to bring ledgers, blockchains, XRP Ledger, Ethereum, all of them, like they don't know anything about the real world. It's just whatever data is on the chain. It's a glorified database and transaction processing system. And so if you have a smart contract that you want to be a function of the weather in Austin today, you need entities that can inject that data. So oracles are these things that can bring in real world values and information onto the chain in a reliable way. So then even once you have that, definitely it's, again, because of this open world, it's not one chain's going to solve all the problems for everybody, because that chain would not be good at anything if it's trying to do everything. So a key capability that exists is cross-chain bridges. So this is a way in which you can lock a value on one chain, and an entity does that, and then they issue the value on some other chain. So you can say, use some of these primitives on the XRP ledger, but then maybe there's some kind of specific smart contract on the Ethereum network you really want to interact with. You can then have these chains that let you actually cross and use the Ethereum network to do that. Similarly, there's this concept of side chains where there's more native transfer between, say, the XRP ledger and other side chains. In this case, there could be an EVM side chain that's compatible with the EVM the Ethereum virtual machine smart contract virtual machine, but isn't the Ethereum network itself, because maybe you don't want to scale, you don't want to be interacting with and having to figure out how to scale and do that. Maybe you're a private institution that wants to run your chain that for privacy reasons or regulatory reasons, you have to restrict the participants in a pretty heavy manner. You can still do that, but then have value moving across these different chains in a way that's secure and seamless for users. So this is starting to be how interoperability, this section is really about how you start to connect to traditional financial systems when you're not servicing those financial needs using the primitives on the blockchain. There's a lot of activity happening in this space. I think this is went to underscore where we're still pretty early. And these buckets are similar to the slide I showed you earlier, but these are specific to companies that are working at least in part on the XRP ledger. So not only is this just happening on XRP ecosystem, it's happening in Bitcoin, Ethereum, lots of different tokens. So there's lots of ideas and energy, but the ways in which these things come together is still evolving and still emerging. So I think some takeaways, and then looking forward to some Q&A to kind of see which way people want to learn more about the space. It's that this technology is proven. Bitcoin started in 2008. It's still here through all the up and downs, and the industry is continuing to learn and grow. I think if we kind of go back to that one slide about kind of crypto starting at the bottom of the financial stack and working way up, that's the big opportunity. And that's going to come from building composable systems that are kind of compliant and targeted on these real-world business use cases. And that becomes endless as we kind of figure it out. I think the way I would analogize is today, nobody asks you if you're an internet company. Like every company at least has an email address that they use. I think similar things will happen with blockchain where you'll start to see it just embedded in a lot of different financial services that are offered. Because of the open nature of this, there's a great benefit of getting to see and learn and explore and then contribute back, but there's a lot to collaborate and learn to make that happen. It still is that kind of early adopter phase where it's just even messy for developers to contribute, but we're starting to see kind of as we're focusing on these use cases, that becoming less and less of a barrier. Feel free to scan this and go to these websites to learn more about the XRP ledger in particular, but also happy to spend the next little time here answering any questions. So thanks for listening. Is XRP UTXO based? No, it's an account-based model, which, there's trade-offs there, but part of the reason that was developed originally when the XRP ledger was created was actually with an eye towards financial products where it's useful to have an ongoing account that you can attach information to and easily track and understand what's happening. But certainly trade-offs. Ripple as a company had been sued by the SEC almost 2 years ago, I think maybe a little bit longer ago, And the determination was XRP is not a security and not a security ongoing. And so, in some ways, Ripple and then XRP was kind of an early challenge in the space for us, and where there's a lot of other kind of folks going through that right now. I think the benefit is, I think it's driving clarity for the industry. I think for Ripple in particular, we can continue to move forward and be part of this ecosystem and build on top of it. But I think that speaks to the newness of this technology and how regulators are figuring out how it works and how to work with it. Behind you, and then we'll come up after.
In case of use case scenarios in the, let's say, conflict zone areas or areas that they have less access to financial institutions, and you guys have done any, for example, projects supporting humanitarian aids, let's say working with UN or other big humanitarian entities to support underprivileged communities that they do have, let's say, access to financial resources, and then if yes, or is there a way that for people to use Ripple and perhaps exchanging into fiat in their own community?
So today, like our enterprise software, we don't directly offer that in those type of communities or those type of use cases. I think there are a couple non-affiliated with Ripple users that use XRP in that capacity. I know it's been used for grants and donations for other types of services. I think the challenge there is still, that integration with the traditional financial, institutions in those jurisdictions where you still need, if you want somebody to have fiat because they need to pay their bills and go to the store to pay in whatever their fiat is, that still is going through that last leg is still in the traditional financial system. And so there's still work to do to improve it. Yeah, you had a question?
So two things. On the XRP is up 20% today. What do you say about that?
I generally don't look because it goes up and down and in many ways. I think part of the news was yesterday that there was a final decision, a judgment decision in this lawsuit. And so that's how the market reacted, I take it.
Secondly, you talked a little bit about the liquidity required in the system, and any payment system requires liquidity. And you mentioned people can provide liquidity. What does that mean?
Yeah, so I think, I'll go back to that slide, I can point at something. So the idea being here where, since it's an open system, anyone can place offers in this decentralized exchange. So there's not a permissioned entry into being able to say, make it explicit. Suppose you're trying to send a payment from, the Philippines to Mexico. If you have stablecoin representations of the Philippine peso and the Mexican peso on the blockchain, anyone that can hold those assets can place orders to buy and sell in the order book, and then if there's a payment that gets routed through that, they can be the counterparty that's facilitating that payment. If you think about then these compliance layers that I talked about on the slide later, if as a payment service provider, if you have restrictions on who's allowed to facilitate and be a counterparty along that pathway, you can start to add those on top of this. But the idea is it can compose as well, where as a liquidity provider, it's possible that you can get the right KYC or get the right regulatory clearance to be part of that, but you can then also participate in other pools where it's not as important to you. So it becomes more of this opportunity to be providing liquidity in as many different venues and mechanisms as possible, but it's not segregated by you being on a different blockchain or a different technology. It can kind of intermix. I wouldn't say that's like requirement, but I think it's a benefit that I think by having this kind of lower barrier to entry of the technology, it makes it even possible in a way that wasn't before. And I think it's particularly useful as you get into, if you think about maybe outside currencies, but if you think about other things that you might want to trade between, I don't know, real estate and maybe there's a gaming token that's represented on the chain, like you may not have a market maker that's going to go be around to be making markets there, but if you have communities and people building that, you get the benefit from it being there.
So with this, does that mean that going forward there may not be money market or market makers, or just an exchange on the layer?
No, I'd expect there to continue to be market makers, and it's just this could be a platform where they're making their markets. But I think the benefit is, today, maybe it's less the case in kind of say securities where there's kind of more structured markets, but in fact, FX market's pretty fragmented. The idea here is this is just reducing that fragmentation. So market makers could still be making markets here, but maybe there's also an opportunity where it's not in their economic interest today to go serve a particular currency pair or asset pairs because it's just too much to deal with. This could make it easier for individuals to take on that role. Cool. Well, thank you for listening. I'm around to catch up for any other questions, but I appreciate it.